Bears in Space is a comedic bullet hell boomer shooter that was developed by a team of just 3 people known as Broadside Games, and it was published by Ravenscorp. Bears in Space is quite the experience, with lots of humor that is genuinely funny, and has been described as high on life if that game was, well, actually funny. The comedy is sprinkled all throughout the campaign, but the gameplay, art style, and environmental variety kept me hooked just as much. The premise is that you are Maxwell Adams, a space captain who is on the verge of retirement, and you are aboard a spaceship at the beginning of the game that is transporting imprisoned bears for some reason. After the ship is under threat of attack by a troop of space bears set on freeing their captive brethren, you decide to set the ship into warp speed, which somehow ends up merging you with a talking bear known as Bear Tana. From there, the journey kicks off, with the main goal being to return to Earth, at least initially. What the merging of man and bear means for gameplay is that our protagonist now has the ability to dash, double jump, be resistant to fall damage, and can go into a berserker mode like Bear Rage after consuming honey.
Max, you know what to do.
In this game, you will traverse desert locales, classic sci-fi metallic corridors, medieval castles and villages, and even a megalithic bouncy house that holds great religious significance. And yes, you heard that correctly. And that really just names about half of the places you will see in this game. On top of that, most of these environments are very bright and colorful, just generally full of life and personality. And such spaces are inhabited by all sorts of robots, both friendly and hostile, that make up 99% of the enemies encountered, I would say.
Oh, it was you. That makes sense. Max, be a doll and kill them, would ya?
Anyone familiar with the bullet hell genre will immediately see this aspect of the gameplay in the sheer number of projectiles that the player has to avoid. There are enemies that will rush the player in droves, but a vast majority of enemies shoot out loads of projectiles. Some enemies launch more projectiles than others, and in some cases larger projectiles, or some enemy types might even have multiple different attacks. In fact, swarms of projectiles is probably a more apt way of describing what you have to contend with. Most regular combat encounters I found to be challenging enough, but also fairly easy for someone who plays as many boomer shooters as I do. And this was on the game's hard difficulty. However, some of the boss fights can be pretty challenging, and like the rest of the game's combat, quite fun as well. And the boss fights are really where the bullet hell can get almost overwhelming. Luckily, we have access to a wide array of weaponry, and I know that I often say this when reviewing boomer shooters, but in this case the weapons on offer are extremely vast. Even more than in most similar shooters. In fact, I didn't even find or unlock all of the weapons in the game. However, what I did get to use was an infinite ammo phaser pistol, a shotgun called the scatter laser, and the auto phaser, which fills the assault rifle role. Moving on to the heavier weapons, there is the minigun like Gatling laser, which is great for breaking shields, by the way, and the shotgun can also break shields, as well as a few different rocket launchers, with the Gamma launcher being a fantastic example of what a boomer shooter rocket launcher should be. There is even a tiny little gun known as the SFG that is basically the noisy cricket from Men in Black, and it even makes you fly backwards with every shot, much like in the movie. I also really liked the weapon aesthetics, as they all have a very cartoony design to them, with some even looking like the laser guns you might expect to see in science fiction from the 1950s and 60s. What makes these weapons even better is that their ammo capacity can be upgraded at a vendor, with the game's currency known as VicBucks. But on top of that, each primary weapon is upgraded to deal more damage or to unlock a new alternate fire mode after a certain number of kills. And I say primary weapon because there are a lot of secondary weapons in the game that are basically more gimmicky than useful. Sure, they are creative and sometimes funny, but there's really no good reason to use them as far as combat is concerned. Plus, they can't be upgraded, which is a bit of a bummer. And I won't go into the specific weapons, I'll leave that up to you to discover. Aside from the weapons, there are some tools that become available to the player as well, like a gun that activates specific buttons to unlock doors, or open up the path forward in a variety of ways. A magnet that acts like a grappling hook in platforming sections, a dial pad that unlocks certain doors, and a plunger scrap metal combo that redirects lasers. So basically, these are all just necessary for traversal, but the light puzzle-solving aspect that arises from figuring out which tool to use does make the platforming sections that much more engaging. And that is truly one of Bears in Space's greatest strengths, engagement, which is further achieved by throwing in all sorts of side games, and some combat sequences or entire levels will completely change genres. There are a couple of Time Crisis-like gameplay sequences, as well as a few levels that play like Space Invaders. This ups the gameplay variety tenfold, and it is just flat out unique, as I haven't really seen a game change genres like this in any other boomer shooter, or frankly any other game in general. You can even take an alternate route at several points along the way to play a game of basketball, or Basket Cube as it's called in this universe. What's also great is that these little side activities aren't just fun, but they also win you more of those very valuable VicBucks.
Max! Wait for me!
Oh, you're alive. There's no room. Bye! Let's roll.
It's also worth noting that a major part of the humor is all of the references to pop culture and other games, with one of my favorite being a side activity that basically transports you to a version of Facing Worlds, the famous map from Unreal Tournament. And the prize for passing this sequence is a flak cannon, which functions just like it did in Unreal, just with that goofy Bears in Space aesthetic, of course. My only major critique is that, much like Wrath Aeon of Ruin, the game did feel a bit too long, with it dragging on a bit toward the end. However, this is a very funny and enjoyable game overall, with buttery smooth controls that are instantly noticeable in the movement, shooting, and rapid weapon switching. Combat is fast and hectic, with the spaces in between being full of jokes, references, and the aforementioned side objectives that combine to create a fun and unique experience. Bears in Space is an absolute blast, and if you are a fan of first-person shooters, this game really deserves your time. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you absolutely hated it, don't hesitate to hit that dislike button. As always, enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh, mate, that was unreal! Meh. Oh, but bottom me word, the gun is yours.